Welcome, nerds, to your other half of the news. That's right, this is the show where after we've reported on it in the news and it becomes a thing inside of pop culture, this is where we talk about the interactions therein. So like if a movie gets released, at that point all we can report on is numbers, and that's boring. So I don't generally cover that in the news, but we can talk about, you know, whether we liked it. And the reason I don't do reviews is because like then I have to do it in a very timely manner. So this is just, you know, an average guy who doesn't always have time to catch a brand new movie talking about the things that we've interacted with in the last week as far as general pop culture is concerned. So all of the categories that we cover in the news show are game for this one. And this, all of that long rambling intro aside, is that just happened. This is the show where we talk about the things that happened over the course of the last week, and in the comments section you can join that conversation and let me know what you interacted with. Did you watch a movie that everybody said you should have watched 6 months ago and you finally got to it? That was Black Adam for me last week. And very likely it's going to be Ant-Man and Quantumania as soon as it hits streaming on Disney Plus. So yeah, is that the case? Let's have that conversation down in the comments. We can talk about it, and then you'll find yourself in the comments show, in the shout out show rather, over on the second channel. So yeah, all kinds of great stuff, man. So this week for That Just Happened, we got some heavy hitters, man. First up on the list is Birdman. This was our movie recommendation for the week this week, and Birdman came out in 2014. I said it in the suggestion portion of the main channel, and then it'll get translated into a short later on this channel, or on the Nerd News Clips channel. And that is, Michael Keaton has never been better in my eye. Michael Keaton is always a win. Michael Keaton is, I believe he's a Canadian treasure, but still, a treasure nonetheless. And Edward Norton, same thing. Edward Norton is always a win. I don't care that he's apparently very difficult to work with behind the scenes. It pays off. I think, honestly, we get a little bit of taste of that in Birdman, because the character he plays, in that respect at the very least, strikes me very much as Edward Norton-esque, just because he writes his own lines, quote unquote. He's the reason why people go see a movie. I mean, like, maybe certain movies, sure, but like that just seems the kind of ego that he has in real life, and he gets to show us that on screen. So maybe it's not as much acting for Ed in this one, but whoa, Edward Norton is always a win. The scene, this movie, the reason I love this movie, aside from it just being super meta and aware of itself at all times, is brilliant in and of itself, but the reason I fell in love with this movie, when I watched it the very, very, very first time, and every time I've watched it since, the reason why I think this movie is a cut above the rest by a long shot, is because the scene where Edward Norton gets introduced into the play. So the basic premise of the movie, Michael Keaton is a former superhero actor. He did a trilogy that made billions of dollars back in, I believe they frame it in the early 90s. So not unlike the Michael Keaton in real life. The name of his superhero in the 90s, though, in the movie, is Birdman. Not Batman, so don't get it confused. But he suffered something. He has some sort of... they only allude to this, so I gotta find very sensitive words to use when doing... But he has some sort of traumatic event that potentially does something to his brain, is what's alluded to at one point in the movie. So he starts to hear Birdman and starts to visually see the character of Birdman, which is a younger version of himself. A kind of poorly de-aged version of Michael Keaton. The special effects aren't great in this, but that's not why you're watching it. And just, oh man. So... after that happens, he needs to prove that he's an actor. I didn't write down the character's name in any of my notes, so I apologize. I'm just going to keep calling them by the actor's name. Michael Keaton's character, he needs to prove himself as an artist. So he is adapting a very famous play. What do we think of when we think of love, I think is the name of the play, or something along those lines. And it's a real play, and they had to credit it in the credits at the end of the movie. It is a real play, and so he's taking it to Broadway, and he's trying to show that he's more than just a superhero actor. And then, you know, hilarity, it's not really a comedy, but there are definitely comedy moments. Hilarity ensues, basically. At one point, early on in the movie, the supporting actor that plays opposite of Michael Keaton's character in this play in the movie, he drops out or gets sick or something along those lines and can no longer be a part of the play. So they need somebody to replace him. And they start throwing around all these names, and then they come to Edward Norton's character. Again, don't remember the character's name. I literally just watched this last night, so it's kind of funny that I can't remember the name, but you know, ADD is a thing. ADHD, sorry. So he said, well, is he available? And yes, he is. And so they bring him in, and the scene, I know this is a long way to get to this point, but the scene where we see Edward Norton and Michael Keaton interact for the very first time, when they're throwing around lines, when they're seeing if this is going to be a chemistry that works on stage between these two actors, that back and forth between Michael Keaton and Edward Norton is some of the most amazing acting I think I have ever seen. And then there's another much more intense back and forth that they have after the play opens, and they kind of end up wrestling on the floor in the little break room area. Just, oh man, these actors, this movie, I can't remember the name. They won best director, best picture, something the year that it came out, for a reason. It is that damn good. I will just continue gushing about this movie until we move on. So I'm just going to force myself to get past it. But if you've never watched the movie Birdman and you are a cinemaphile, that's the other thing about this, is it's like 98% of the movie is shot as one continuous shot, which breaks so many rules in cinema theory, but it works so freaking well. And then the soundtrack is just jazz drums. I mean, there's a little bit of jazz, there's a little bit more to it as you get to the end and stuff, but by and large, this soundtrack is a guy sitting at a drum kit. And you actually see said guy sitting at drum kit at certain points in the movie because they needed something to distract you from the fact that they have to do creative cuts so that you don't see the cuts. And just incredibly well done on every single level, except for the special effects. We did cover that. But yeah, so if you've never seen Birdman, you are a cinemaphile, or you just have an appreciation for a slightly more meta commentary on comic book movies and the culture around comic book movies, you really should watch this movie. This should be a movie that is on regular rotation in anyone who falls into those categories' lives. It's just that damn good. So, all right, we're moving on. Sorry. The other thing this week was The X-Files has found its way back into my rotation. We're to that point with our pop culture consumption, in that The X-Files is just always one to watch a season or two offhand because it's The X-Files, and we owe, honestly, a lot of the status of television to The X-Files, because back in, when did it start? 92, 93, something along those lines. It was filmed very similarly, not to the same degree as we get today, so don't mistake what I'm saying, but it was very similar in its production style to a legitimate full-length movie. And that happened for 20 plus episodes, a season. So you're getting a new episode, new hour-long episode, 45-minute long episode of this series that is basically shot like maybe a low-tier movie, but still movie nonetheless. So yeah, and that I think is kind of the most obvious genesis of modern television, where granted they're only like 10, maybe 12 episodes if you're lucky, but they are legitimately 12 episodes that could individually be movies, and they basically have the budgets of movies as well, where that was definitely unheard of in the 90s, and even more unheard of much earlier than that in the history of television. So yeah, we owe a lot to The X-Files, not just because it's a great nerdy show, but also because it just kind of was a milestone in so many ways in the industry. So I'm watching it, and I've made it through about 7 episodes of the first season, and every time I do this, I'm like, God, I really love the X-Files. Really love the X-Files, and you should too, because it's amazing. Next, finally, this will be probably the last time for a little bit anyway that we talk about The Walking Dead, at least on this show, because I finished it. Season 11, episode, what was it, 20, I believe, was crazy. Spoilers, I guess, potentially. But so the thing I wanted to talk about with this on today's show is the setup. Because this is supposed to set up 3 spinoffs. So those 3 spinoffs is the Maggie and Negan spinoff, which we just talked about in the news episode, the Daryl spinoff, and then the Michonne and Rick spinoff, which we know is actively in production. So we just got the trailer for the Maggie and Negan spinoff. The only thing that I think was not done crazy well in this final episode for the mainline Walking Dead series, I guess there's kind of 2 things, but the big one is there is 0 setup for Maggie and Negan. Zero setup. None of it exists. There is no reason to believe that at the conclusion of this episode that these 2 characters are going to go off to a completely different state together, a couple hundred to maybe a couple thousand miles away from where the mainline series takes place. They're going to New York together, and now we know it has something to do with Herschel. So all of that could be explained away. You know, somebody from New York comes and kidnaps Herschel, but that even raises more questions than it answers anyway. So like, just that's the only really nitpicky thing I feel like I can say, because at the end of each season we got a little bit of flowery, fluffy, oh, everything's so great. Well, not each season, but most seasons we got that flowery, fluffy, everything's so great kind of feeling. And then at the beginning of the following season, everything falls to pieces and we got to see who the new antagonist is and what the new issues are and so on and so forth. So that part, I know a lot of people have issue with, oh, it just ended too easy. It did it though? Like, did it though? Yeah, so I don't see how they can set that up. And then the other issue that I was going to say is there's no clear indication of what the Daryl series is going to be. And I say that and I instantly regret putting it in those words, because I feel like the indication is one thing, but the bits of information that we have been fed since the end of this show is saying another. So from the way the series ended, what Daryl is going to do in his show is he's going to be a scout. He's going to be the one that goes out and finds these other communities, these other pockets of survivors, and just kind of establishes that they exist. And then he's going to have Carol go out and make first contact or do what needs to be done as according to how Daryl, reports his findings. So presumably, the Daryl show, based off the information in the final episode of season 11, the Daryl show is going to be that. He's going to be a scout. He's going to basically survey all of the land around their settlements and find other survivors and make friends effectively. And then enemies are going to ensue, and there's going to, he's going to be cut off. All of the potential storylines are there, and they kind of write themselves. He's going to get cut off from the main Commonwealth or Alexandria, not be able to make contact, and so that's going to be an issue. Or he's gonna go too far out, and his bike's going to break down, so he's got to find a way to get back. Something, like I said, it kind of writes itself. But the information that we've been given since the end of season 11 is that there is potentially going to be overseas travel involved, in that there's even talk of it potentially taking place in France, which is crazy. Like, how does that get set up? Where did that come from? Why do we want to see what's going on across the seas unless there's some sort of set? Like, I feel like, since apparently the first show that we're going to be getting, actually the first show, it looks like, because we actually have legit footage from it, is going to be Maggie and Negan. But then the only one that we've seen them actually working on, even though, again, we got the trailer, the only one we've seen them working on, we have production images of the Michonne and Rick spinoff. That one gets set up beautifully. Like, it's very obvious what's going to happen there. Michonne's going to find Rick. They're going to get Rick out. It's going to be an 8-episode season. It's going to take them eight episodes to do that, because Michonne finds the letter from Rick at the very, very end of the final episode. She finds that letter from Rick. She then writes a letter to the kids, and so that way, hopefully, it gets found, and blah, blah, blah. And that, I think, was set up friggin' beautifully. I was assuming that the Daryl show was going to be the basic continuation of the life in the Commonwealth that was established in the final 2 seasons of the main show, and then Michonne and Rick series is going to be the continuation of the general story that started in season 1, because Rick is kind of the through line there, and then the Maggie and Negan was going to be the only one that was a slightly more traditional spin-off, in that it is 2 non-primary characters. I guess is a main character is a weird thing with such a large cast, but 2, and calling them secondary isn't appropriate either, but 2 other characters that aren't Rick, effectively, telling their own new story. That's going to be the one that's covering like completely new ground, because there's been trails that are leading to all of the things that theoretically are going to be happening in the Daryl show and the Michonne and Rick show. So, also, Maggie and Negan one is the only one that has a proper title at this point. We don't know what the Daryl show is going to be called. We don't know what Michonne and Rick's going to be called. We do know that Walking Dead Dead City is going to be the Maggie and Negan show. So, I don't know, man. I've gone way too long about Walking Dead. I finished it. If you haven't watched it, man, you're missing out on some of the best television in modern TV. And then, of course, the final thing that I wanted to talk about real quick, Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 1. Okay, so I said it very briefly in the news show. I want to elaborate on it a little bit because, like I do, I'm kind of long-winded. So whenever you get a show that one character or one element of this show or this franchise or this IP or however you want to phrase that, one piece of that becomes incredibly popular, generally speaking, corporate types, people who are, looking to make money, trying to expand the bottom line, if you will, those kind of people are going to force the creator of said show to lean as hard as possible into that element, be it a character, be it what have you. Usually it's a character. So very specifically, I'm looking at the likes of Daryl from The Walking Dead. I believe was supposed to be a relatively short-lived character. Wasn't supposed to survive all 11 seasons. And then also Steve Urkel from Family Matters was only supposed to be in an episode, and then he just blew up and everybody loved him, so he became the focus of the damn show about halfway through. Not even halfway through, much sooner than that, like season 3 or something. He was like the character. And then it's happened to multiple other shows throughout recent history for sure. So that is kind of what I was expecting this to turn into once Grogu became the baby Yoda, and everybody needs to see Grogu because Grogu is so adorable, and he legitimately is so damn adorable. But like, he's not, I think he is still a part of the show much past what Jon Favreau initially intended. However, it has been made fairly well known at this point that Jon Favreau doesn't have necessarily like great grand scheme, long-term storytelling goals. He just basically does it a season at a time. So when we get to a conclusion, he will have to set up a series conclusion at the beginning of a season because he's not going to get that much information. He doesn't think that far ahead, generally speaking. So instead of, everything being about Grogu, the story still circles around the Mandalorian, still circles around Din Djarin. Like, this is so well played. Like, I can't even express how appreciative I am that the thing that makes Grogu as powerful in pop culture as he is because he's not the main character, because we're not spending exorbitant amounts of time talking about him in series. We can do all we want with marketing. We can do all we want with, you know, fans dressing up as him and buying toys and doing things. That helps a lot, sure, but the thing that keeps him interesting is that we don't know really anything about him. And if they were to do what other shows have done and lean into that as hard as possible, eventually we would know everything about him, and then he would lose all mystery and nobody would care anymore and their ratings would tank. And that's not happening, and I'm super excited about it. They're creating more issues for us to try and figure out. They're creating more mystery for us. Like, we're in hyperspace, and Din Djarin's asleep, and Baby Yoda's up in the R2 box, and he's looking around because he's a baby, and he's seeing all the... I know, Grogu, I get it. But he's a baby, so he's looking at all the cool stuff, and then all of a sudden we see these hyperspace, like, Cthulhu creatures off behind the lights, just kind of chilling, going super freaking fast. Like, what the hell was that? Do we get to see more of that? Like, that's the kind of stuff. That is how you do a Star Wars, man. That is... Oh, it's brilliant. Okay. I think I've rambled long enough. That is what happened this week. That just happened. And what just happened for you? I'm still filling this one out. What just happened for you this week? What have you interacted? Did you also, you know, do you have an opinion on the things that we've been talking about, that I've been rambling about for the last 40, 30 minutes, whatever it has been? Yeah, so... definitely, let's talk about all that stuff in the comments section, and then anything you got for me, we'll probably throw that into the shout-out show next time. So thank you very much, nerds, for joining me. I appreciate our little time together. Before we go, always remember that if it's generally nerdy, it's probably here.